Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my Week 10 LPL overview, analysis, and I guess, of course, at the end, my updated power rankings, but by the end of this week, we will know all 10 playoff teams. We will know their order because this is the final week of LPL action here in summer. Very, very, very exciting. There were a lot of good games this week, but of course, because it's LPL, I don't want to waste too much of your time. I do have a little bit of housekeeping to do before the video. Up on the screen right about now, you're going to see the updated schedule that I'm going to have going on this week. Obviously, this video is going up a day early here on the Sunday instead of the Monday that LPL videos typically go up on. That's because this entire week is going to be jam-packed with videos. You will not be missing a beat over the course of the next 7 or 8 days. We're going to be pumping out 10 to 11 videos here, and it's going to be awesome for you guys. So I hope you are excited. Hope you are ready. We are kicking it off, the big power week of the year for me with this video here. But I don't want to waste too much more time because we've got so much going on this week. So let's go ahead and jump right into day one, and let's go ahead and jump right into our first series here of day one. That, of course, being ThunderTalk Gaming taking on RNG. We'll never give up. RNG picking up the 2-0 win. They've been doing this pretty consistently over the past few weeks, playing in the first series of the week, picking up a pretty clean 2-0 win against a team that does have some promise, and RNG picks up a really nice one here. They looked much better in both games, mostly due to the fact that their carries are just kind of playing out of their mind right now, or at least their top players. Player of the series here was actually a little bit difficult because Xiaohu, I thought, played great, but so did Gala, so did Ming. Wei played really well in this series as well. You had a lot of choices here. For me, it is going to go to Xiaohu in the mid lane. The two games to Talia were very, very solid. I don't think he could miss a Q this entire series. He looked really, really good here, and he dominated his laning phase. Not only was he ahead against the Ahri, which already is tough enough because the shove battle is relatively even there, as long as the Ahri is relatively competent. But, you know, Ahri also tried to make plays across the map, and Xiaohu's were just significantly more successful. Played a really, really solid series here, so Xiaohu is going to get my player of the series here, but that's not to discredit anybody else on this team, especially Gala, who I think has been really, really solid recently. Obviously, he's one of the top AD carries in the world. I know I've given some pushback to the idea that he is the best AD carry in the world, because I don't necessarily believe that he is in the conversation for best ADC in the world, but he is very, very good. He's top 5, pretty much no question, and he proves why in this series is, you know, you see an Aphelios in game 2, and he's by himself, and you have an Ahri on the flank, and Aphelios completely deletes the Ahri. I don't think that's how that matchup is supposed to go, but Gala's positioning's great. That champion's a little strong right now, but overall, just a really, really good showing from him. Really, really protective and doing a lot of damage, as Gala typically does. And then Ming, I thought, played great here on the Nautilus. Also on the Brahma game 1. Game 1 was a little bit more, I don't want to say boring, but just a little bit more you know? Overall, just a good series for RNG in general. Wei had some good games here on the Trundle. Breathe got a little outplayed, but we'll talk about that later. Moving on to ThunderTalk. Not the best series here. Obviously, they're kind of fighting for their playoff life this week. The 7 through, I'd say, like 12 spots are kind of all up for grabs right now, and ThunderTalk was sitting at a position where if they could grab a few wins this week, or maybe even just one win in a series this week, they're probably in playoffs. But RNG is a tough competition, obviously. They are also fighting for seeding in the top 4, so I don't blame ThunderTalk too much for getting crushed here. They're playing against one of the better teams in the league, and they didn't look completely helpless, especially in Game 2. They looked pretty alright. My dud of the series, though, is going to go to UCal, who kind of has been the shining light, or the best player, I would say, on this team over the course of their pretty big miracle run over the second half of the season. I've been very high on how UCal has been playing in the second half of the summer split. Unfortunately, he's just no match for Xiaohu in terms of talent, so he's unfortunately going to get the dud of the series here. Like I said, he got solo killed by an Aphelios trying to assassinate him. That's about as bad as it gets. And then also, never had the shove battle on Talia. His roams were significantly less successful because he's an Ahri into a Talia. Like, was just never going to go well for the Ahri in that matchup. I will give some credit, though. I actually think parts of TT played really, really well in this series. I want to give credit to Hoya. You got to feel bad for Hoya, who you know, plays as the Gnar and then plays into the Gnar in game 2 and wins both sides of that matchup. Looks really, really solid, and is pretty heavily up on Breathe. There's a big fight down in bot lane. Hoya TPs to try and help out his team. Breathe does not. By the time he gets back to top lane, Breathe has basically caught up and surpassed Hoya in terms of gold, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, so the lane lead I got was basically worthless, and that's got to feel very hard done. But Hoya played a good series, and I think so did Kepler and Yao Yao, even if they were relatively outskilled. They were both still relatively important, especially Kepler doing a lot of damage here, and those Alistar knockups were still pretty solid in that game 2 here. Or I'm sorry, the Braum was solid in game 2. The Alistar was game 1. The Alistar was the bad game. My bad. I forgot. But yeah, overall, TT just not looking great. Outlook-wise, this really hurts TT's outlook. Obviously, this forces them to win their game later in the week, which we will get to. If they don't, they're out of playoffs. If they do, they're in playoffs. So definitely some stakes for ThunderTalk, but definitely not the way you wanted to start the week. As for RNG, they needed this win in order to keep themselves alive for second place. Obviously, I imagine they want second place here, so moving to 13-2 is good, but the job is not over yet. They're going to have to win later in the week in order to secure that. Moving on to our second series here of day 1 action. We had a pretty important one in terms of playoff implications, surprisingly, and that was Bilibili Gaming taking on Team WE. And Bilibili does pick up the win, but it is not in the way that they want to. They actually put themselves in a pretty hard done position here. We will get to that at the end here, but let's just talk about this series first and foremost. BLG was certainly the better team here, although it wasn't by nearly as much as you would have hoped. WE keeps their 0-16 dream alive here by getting crushed by BLG in game 1 and then in game 3. Unfortunately, they win game 2. I mean, fortunately for them. Unfortunately for BLG, they win game 2, which actually puts BLG in a pretty rough position. But moving to how BLG played in the series, I thought they played all right. A couple players on this team are good. I'm just not sold on their roster as a whole, especially not as a unit, but even some of their pieces I'm really just not sold on. Player of the series here was a little bit of a difficult choice because I think a lot of people had good moments and a lot of people had bad moments as well. It was very much an up and down series, I think, from almost everybody on this team. My player of the series is going to go to Ben in the top lane, who I think continues to look like the best player on this team. Not that that's saying a whole lot. Obviously, I think Crisp is also looking really good, and he was in the conversation for me, but he didn't do nearly enough in lane for me to like really feel confident about it. And also, he quietly had like a pretty rough game 2 on that Nami. Not a great game 2, just in terms of actual gameplay, even if the score looked okay. And so for me, Ben is going to get that player of the series here. He looked pretty good in game 1, especially here on the Jax, just being able to cause so many problems for WE in general. And then game 3 on the Gnar, he was really just a problem in the late game, but those late game ultimates and just Gnar in general, the Gnar things that you can do are very, very difficult to deal with if you're not prepared for it. So Ben looked really, really solid here. I thought Weiwei also had a pretty solid series, most notably that game 3 here on the Trundle. He really controlled the map, like, heavily. View had no chance in that game 3 to go into him, and it was a really good performance from Weiwei overall, although I don't think he was the most consistent over the course of the 3-game series. I'm still really worried about Doggo. I just don't think he's very good. Like, I don't know how to say that in a way that doesn't sound like Flame, but, like, he hasn't been very good at any point this year in terms of positioning, in terms of aggression. I just don't know what he does that really separates him from any, like, average tier LPL AD carry. I really just think he is an average tier LPL AD carry, and that's not necessarily something you want to say heading into playoffs. So, definitely a little concerning there, but overall, BLG at least got the win. As for WE, they keep the dream alive. They keep the 0-16 dream afloat, which is awesome. They're sitting at 0-15 now, which is about as close and about as good as you're going to get. Some of the players on this team did play well in the series. I want to give a shout out to the 2 players I've kind of been crediting for the last 4 weeks now in terms of WE, Shanks and Jing, who I still think are pretty good, and I think that they are showing improvement every week. Obviously, Shanks was a pretty good player last year when this team was actually good. He's continued to play well, even if the rest of the team has not. Jing was really bad in spring and really bad at the start of the year, got benched, and has come back in here and has recently kind of been much, much better. He's definitely shown a lot of upside, and I would expect him to either get a job next year or, unfortunately, be, you know, one of the few ones that I'm talking about, like, hey, maybe mid-season somebody picks him up and just gives him a shot, because he's definitely shown some things here for WE that give me some excitement that if he had talent around him, he might actively be able to do something. It's not, like, a lot of talent, but it is something there. It wasn't all good, though. Top side of this map was not great. Demon is going to get my dud of the series. He has been awful ever since he was subbed in for Bubu. Not that Bubu is much better, but Demon has pretty clearly been the worst top laner in the LPL. other than maybe Pandacy, but even then, I think they push each other. He's not very good. He doesn't really accomplish much. He only plays aggressive picks, and he never really wins on them. He got completely bodied in game 1 here. Even in game 3, he was not very good. Even in game 2 on the Fiora, he took way too many chances, and he was kind of the reason BLG was in that game at all. So overall, just not a good series from Demon. And then View, I thought, got pretty much completely out jungled by Weiwei. Not a complete shock there. View has not been particularly good ever since he subbed in for WE. Obviously, Beishang is better, but they wanted to see what they had in View because they're not winning anyways. But overall, just not a good series overall from him. Just completely out jungled by Weiwei. As outlooks go for these two teams in terms of playoffs, obviously WE's been so out of playoffs that it's ludicrous. But BLG actually really does not want this loss here, because this loss actually means that a lot has to go right. This is BLG's last series of the year, and so a lot now has to go right for BLG to make playoffs. Not only do other teams, like at least a few of OMG losing to IG, Anyone's Legend not winning a single game this week, because if they do, they'll have the same game record, and AL has the tiebreaker. FPX may be losing. ThunderTalk losing to Rare Atom. Like, there's like multiple of those things have to happen in order for BLG to make playoffs, and obviously it's still in play, but it's very much not likely. So they're gonna have to be hoping for a lot to go right the rest of this week in order for their playoff hopes to be alive. Moving on to day 2 action here, and kicking off day 2 was a fun series here of bottom feeders, but at the end of the day, still fun, between LGD Gaming and Rare Atom. LGD picking up a win here that they very are happy to get, I presume. It's a good win. Overall, just a good win. Not all of their wins this year have been good, and not all of their losses have been good, but this one was good. They looked good overall. Game 1 was super close, even though Rare Atom took it. Honestly, Zora is, like, secretly way too good for this roster. I'm not gonna sit here and be like he's dominant, like he's a top, 5 support or whatever in the region, but, like, he's playing with, like, maybe the worst AD carry in the region, or one of the worst ADCs in the region, and he continues to look really good. His Pike game in game 1 was super influential and super important in order for that Rare Atom team to take the win. He was kind of creating pretty much everything on the map for that team, so big shout out to him. He looked really solid in that game 1. As for LGD, they take games 2 and 3 off of the back of Fearness just being super duper fed in both games. Really fun to watch. Fearness game 2 here on the Kennen was able to blow people up on him, and then game 3 here on the Gnar just completely took over the game. A really fun one from him. He's someone who I think over the past few weeks has definitely gotten better. I'm definitely not still sold on him as like a long-term option as a top laner in the LPL, especially if you want to be an actually good team, but this was a good showing from him against a relatively decent top laner in Cube, who has shown that he can be a playoff caliber player in the past. Fearness just kind of outplayed him and really dominated the series. He's easily going to be my player of the series here for LGD. He looked definitely very good in this series, and I would expect that to hopefully continue later on this week. But yeah, just a really good series from him. And also just a really good series from the top side in general. Kui, I thought, had easily his best series of the year. Leon did not get Nidalee, and so he didn't destroy people. That's kind of been how it's been so far in summer. He wins on Nidalee, he loses on everything else, and that kind of felt like what happened here. 2 games of Vi and then a Graves game. I actually do like the Graves pull out. I think that can be relatively good here into something like a Wukong, and it wasn't, like, dominant, but it was pretty good, and that Vi game in game 2 was really solid. Easily, like I said, his best series of the year. And then Haichao actually played really solid here. 2 games of Ahri where he was actively, like, proactive and looking good. And then a game of Talia where he was kind of all over the map and helping the team out and just looking generally great. I think the top side over on LGD looked pretty solid this series and were definitely the highlights. Not to say Awesome and Jinjiao weren't good either, just it very much felt like Fearness and Kui kind of taking over the game. And then Haichao having a lot of really solid moments as well. Some players that are definitely interesting to look at. Maybe not Kui, because he's kind of been awful all year long, but Fearness and Haichao I have been higher on, I think, than most people over the course of the split, so definitely something to keep in mind there. And then for Rare Atom, they're just bad. Like, iBoy sucks. Like I said, Zora's a good player. He looked really solid on that Pike in game 1. And even in the Yuumi and Rakan games, he wasn't, like, awful. He certainly wasn't the problem. But, man, iBoy just cannot position to save his life. Even on Zeri, the positioning monster, and even on Sivir, he gets Sivir in game 3 here, and it doesn't matter. He's easily going to get my dud of the series here. Not a good series overall from iBoy. Not a good split at all from iBoy. he was this team's worst player by a considerable margin. Like, him and Yanja were certainly not a good duo, but iBoy was definitely the biggest problem on Rare Adam. I don't know if I would be giving iBoy a job next split, and that feels really sad to say. I feel like he's kind of being, he's getting to that point where I'm starting to group him up with like Zoom and GA as players that it's just like, I just don't know if I feel comfortable actively calling them my starting, player anymore, because they just don't play it like it. And like, they're definitely not the players that can elevate a team as we see with Rare Adam this year. So definitely something concerning. He was not good this split at all. Like I said, Leon got completely out-jungled by Kui, which is not a good sign because Kui hasn't been good. And Cube just got completely destroyed in games 2 and 3 by Fearness, which again is not a great sign. It's not like Fearness is like a great top lane or anything like that. But, it is what it is. Outlook-wise for these two teams, neither are making playoffs, so there's really no point in talking about it too much. They're both bad. Like, Rare Adam is going to be moving on to a completely new roster. LGD tried out a bunch of rookies. Who knows what they're going to be keeping. It's going to be an interesting offseason for both of these teams, but neither are going to be focusing on winning anytime soon. Moving on to our second series here of day 2, and our second series was certainly one kind of the opposite of what we saw earlier today, with huge playoff implications. That, of course, being Top Esports taking on Victory 5. 2 of the top 4 teams playing each other in the last week of the season. That feels good. What feels even better is an upset, which is what I feel like we got here with Victory 5 getting 2 pretty dominant wins here over Top, who looked pretty much unbeatable up until today. An unreal win here for V5, and you got to be really excited if you're a V5 fan, because this win was awesome. Let's talk about what they did right. This bottom lane completely obliterated Jackie Love and Mark. We've been hyping up Jackie Love and Mark over the course of the last few weeks as, they've really unlocked each other with their aggressive playstyles, but man, they got trounced in this game. It really was not even close. I want to give both of them credit. Obviously, Fodic was great here positioning-wise. Obviously, he had a really good game, too, here on the Senna, which isn't the most, like, oh my god, he crushed on Senna, thing of all time, right? But still, it's really, really solid. Senna's not a pick that we're seeing all that often. She doesn't particularly do a lot of damage, so when you can stay relatively safe with her and enable basically your entire team to be super proactive across the map, he did his job extremely well. I want to give him huge props for that. And then PP God, who was just phenomenal. I mean, this was probably one of the best support series I've seen in a very long time. PP God was so good. That Nami in game 1 really, really obliterated everything that Kog'Maw Lulu lane wanted to do, which, first of all, why are you picking Kog'Maw Lulu into Lucian Nami? I feel like I can be like, that's a little too greedy. But, second off, that Seraphine game in game 2 was dominant. He was completely destroying that game. He was the most important player on that map, and it wasn't even close. So my player of the series is going to go to Lord PP God here in the bottom lane, although Fodic did have a very, very good series here. And so did the rest of the team. Obviously, Rich crushed Wayward in the top lane. We'll get to that. Not as much Rich's fault as it is Wayward's fault, but, something to keep in mind. And then Rookie's always good. Like, what else do you want me to say about Rookie? He was great here on the Silas. It's what he does. He's a very good player. Oops. But, moving over to Top Esports, this is not what you wanted to see. This team very much looked like it did look like an off day for them. And I'm not sure how to take that, because obviously Top is still a really good team, and they've looked basically unbeatable up until this moment. They got heavily outclassed today, but it didn't even feel like they were trying all that hard. First of all, game 1 draft is troll. Like I said, Kog'Maw Lulu into Lucian Nami is about as brain off as you can get. I don't like Viego here. Just generally not a good draft, I think, overall from Top Esports. Not going to blame it all on draft. They didn't play great in game 1, especially that bottom lane, but game 2, like, it was all player diff. Like, this was just Wayward was not there. Like, his brain was gone. He was 0-6 on Gragas, could do nothing. Jackie Love was playing AFK here, so was Tion. Like, it was just a really weird series. It didn't feel like V5 was playing Top Esports. It felt like they were playing, WE. It just, it didn't, I didn't get it. I didn't particularly understand. And I don't know if it's super indicative of what this Top Esports team actually is. This might have just been like an off day for them. And I'm not really sitting, because this just isn't Top Esports. Like, we've seen them through 10 weeks and even through spring. Like, they just aren't this team, right? I know they're volatile, and we can talk about the volatility, and this could just be like the bottom of the volatility range. I think this is below the bottom of the volatility range. This just very much feels like we weren't even trying that hard. We've already basically locked #1 seed as long as we win later in the week. Who really cares if we lose this? I'm not saying that was their mentality, but it very much felt like that's how they played. So something to keep in mind. Wayward was awful. He's clearly the dud of the series. This was the worst series I've ever seen him play. That's the worst Gragas top game I've ever seen, or one of them. Like, this was just brain off. I'm going in all the time and dying over and over again to an Aatrox, which is like not a particularly good matchup for the Aatrox, and Rich is notoriously bad in lane. So yeah, I don't really know what was going on here with Wayward, but it was certainly not his day. Not that anybody else played better. Jackie Love was also horrendously bad in this series, and so was Tian. So I guess you could really give the dud of the game to any of them, but for me, it's going to go to Wayward in the top lane, because what exactly was happening in that game too? Outlook-wise for these two teams, top is, not clinched the #1 seed, but basically clinched the #1 seed. They have a series later in the week that if they win, they are guaranteed to be #1, even with this loss, so I don't imagine they're going to be worrying too much as long as they can pick up a win later in the week. V5's in a little bit more of a tricky predicament. They can finish anywhere from 2nd to 4th. This win is going to absolutely help them. That keeps their dream alive. If they would have lost this, they actually would have been in danger of dropping as low as 5th. But with this win, I believe they've clinched top 4 and now are relying on JD Gaming and RNG to see what happened the rest of the week. But it's definitely going to be interesting for them, and they're going to be happy to at least have clinched top 4, which is huge in the LPL. Moving on now to day 3, and kicking off day 3 here in week 10 of LPL action, we had another series that has playoff implications between Edward Gaming and Anyone's Legend. And EDG picking up the 2-0 win here, not too many people surprised, but man, poor AL got all of their hardest games towards the back half of the split. They got their hopes up, and now they are sitting below 500, which I don't even imagine they could have believed a couple of weeks ago. But looking what EDG did right, because they did quite a few things right here. First of all, Junjie is in. And yes, I know a lot of people are going to talk about how JJ is the better player, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think JJ is the better player than Junjie. That's not to take away from what Junjie is. I still think Junjie is probably like a top 8-ish jungler in the LPL. He's a very good player, obviously that's just been stuck behind a great player, but it is very clear that this team works better with Junjie in. JJ is a very loud shot-calling presence, and I think that this team has done significantly better when relying on Scout and Mako to make those calls. That, along with the fact that Junjie is just better on picks like Wukong and Trundle and Poppy, it very much feels like Junjie is the play right now for EDG, and he definitely gives them, I think, the best chance to go to Worlds this year. So he's staying in, and then man, has that really unlocked this bottom lane, because holy crap, does Junjie camp the shit out of this bottom lane in a good way for this EDG team. Viper is one of the best players in the world. Like, I know a lot of people are going to talk about Gala being the best ADC in the LPL. For me, it is still Viper, and it is still Viper, like, I'm not going to say easily, but like, for me, it's clearly Viper. And games like this show why. When he's given resources, he's given a Draven to just play into, like, an Aphelios or something in game 1, he's going to blast that Aphelios, get super fed, and roll along. In game 2 now, though, he's going up against the Kalista and Mumu, something that, quite frankly, has a pretty good matchup into Draven, generally speaking, and he absolutely still slams it with help from Junjie and Mako, obviously, but Viper still does a super good job of getting super ahead on Draven and then making the game over, basically instantly. Viper's my player of the series here. He was awesome. He's been awesome all year long for EDG. Even when they've struggled, he's been the most consistent player on this team, and he's looked great. Mako continues to look good. 2 games of Braum here, just protection duty for Viper. They're putting everything into him. I love the strategy. Junjie looked good. Scout looked awesome here. This is, like, we've been talking about it. Scout looked really, really bad earlier in the year. I think him and JJ just honestly don't work together in this meta. I'm not saying, obviously, they can't work together. They won a world championship last year. But, like, this meta just doesn't seem like it is favoring those two as a duo. Scout has been fully unlocked here with Junjie coming in. He's played significantly more for his own laning phase rather than to affect the map. And I think that that has helped him a lot. The Azir game into Akali in game 1 was dominant. He was probably the best player in that game 1. And then game 2 on the Lissandra, he was so effective, not only at making sure the Ahri wasn't able to actively get any roams off, but he gave Viper so much time to do the damage that he needed to on that Draven. Just a really good game and really good series overall from Scout. Flandre has been super underrated over the past few weeks. Even though top lane is kind of a wasteland right now, he's still been really good. As for Anyone's Legend, I mean, they were 7-3 not 3 or 4 weeks ago. Now they're sitting at 7-8. Oops. This is not good for them. They're basically hoping that things go right for them. They play top Esports later in the week, which is not a particularly good sign for them. They have to win that series in order to make playoffs now, which is about as bad as it gets. This series was not good from them. Pretty much everybody got outplayed, but most notably mid-jungle, where Forge got completely destroyed here by Scout. Not only did Scout get the roams off earlier here, especially in Game 2, but he just kind of beat him in lane when he was on the Akali in Game 1, one of Forge's signature picks. And then Xiaohao got completely bodied in the jungle matchup here by Junjia. Xiaohao was someone who I've been very high on all split long. I think he's actually been relatively underrated even in these teams' losses, but this was not a great series from him, and he definitely needed to step it up in order for this team to have a better shot at making playoffs. ZDZ wasn't good in the top lane. Betty and Chocho got completely outplayed in the bot lane. Overall, everybody on Anyone's Legend just sucked. Forge just gonna get my dud of the series here, but you really could have given it to almost anybody on this Anyone's Legend team, and I would have believed you. Outlook-wise for them, EDG has put themselves in a spot where they're pretty comfortable. They're going to get 5 or 6 seed in the playoffs, kind of depending on what happens with Weibo this week. But they feel really, really confident. I think they're kind of playing the best league that they've played all year long right now, which I think is a really, really good thing to say moving into playoffs. They're going to be a dangerous team. As for Anyone's Legend, a lot has to go right for them to actively make playoffs, and that's about as disastrous as you could get after being, in 3rd or 4th place just a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, their talent level was never that high, but man, like, they have collapsed in a record way, and it's really looking like they're going to miss the 10-team playoffs now, which is absurd. So, hopes out to them that they can pull it through, but it just does not look likely right now. Moving on to our second series here of Day 3 action. And it was another one. I mean, almost all of our series this week are going to have some playoff implications, but this one most directly had some, and that was Invictus Gaming taking on OMG. OMG picking up the 2-1 series win and locking themselves into playoffs. You got to feel excited for OMG to be able to get here. Certainly the season's not over at this point, but they've got to feel excited to be in the playoffs and be secured after this win. They looked really, really good in this series. Outside of the Game 1, where it really was the Mole Show and On and June and Zika, and honestly everybody on the team playing really well. Outside of that Game 1, it really was just the OMG show. They looked great here in Games 2 and 3. Pretty much everybody, most notably the top side of this map. I know I've talked about it a few times in previous series, but the top side really was kind of the important side this week. Though bot lane, I guess, in the previous series was super important with Vipers, so who knows? But OMG looking really, really good here. Cream was awesome here on 2 games of Ahri. Certainly 2 of his more interesting games of the year. Obviously, you want to see your star player, your quote-unquote franchise player, which I feel like Cream has kind of become for this team, play well in games where you can lock playoffs, and he absolutely did. He destroyed Game 2 here, and he destroyed Game 3. He's easily my player of the series here for OMG. He was awesome. I hype him up so much here on these Assassins, and it's really fun to watch a team like OMG play because they really don't care that much about meta. Like the one draft here where they cared about meta, Game 1, where they take the Sedge, they take the Sivir, they take the Yuumi. They actually lost, and then they're like, screw it, we're going to go to Rumble. We're going to go to Ezreal. And guess what? They win this series 2-1. Like, this is the kind of team you want to see succeed in the LPL. A team that isn't afraid to play their own style and isn't afraid to put their own spin on things. Play the champs they know they're good at. Cream, obviously, an assassin superstar, and he definitely showed that with 2 games of Ahri here. I don't imagine he's going to get to play that a lot in the playoffs. Akali and Ahri are going to be heavy bans against this team, but I guess also you've got the Shyvana for Shanji. You've got the Rumble now for Shanji because he was awesome on that in this series. Genuinely awesome. You've got the Sylas for Cream that you have to ban. There's so many picks that OMG has that are like staple picks that they can't even be banned out at this point. You're going to get one of them, which is awesome for this team. But yeah, Shanji was incredible here, especially in Game 2 here on that Rumble. Like, this is how you play Rumble. We're not seeing this pick very often in Pro because, honestly, he just doesn't do that much right now in terms of damage. But, man, if you can play him well, like, if you can line up all your shit, it's still gonna hurt. Like, no champ in the game does no damage. And so, yeah, like, shout out to Rumble. This was a very, very, very good pick for Shanji. Obviously, it's been feared for a while. He won LDL MVP a lot of times running that Rumble. And this is why. He was really, really dominant here. And then, honestly, big shout out to Aki. Big shout out to Aki. I've been a little bit down on Aki as a player overall. I thought if they had a higher tier jungler here on OMG, that they might even be a contender kind of team. But Aki played really well here on the Xin Zhao, actually playing a lot better than June on the other side, who I've been much, much more on board with, I think, over the course of the year. Overall, just a really good series from OMG. It's not like Abel and Cold were bad either. The 2 games of Ezreal and Nautilus were really, really solid and definitely helped turn that narrative around, I think, from the beginning of the series after Odd had a really, really good game 1. But, oh, and I didn't even mention you have to ban Abel's Samira. They picked it against him in game 1 and dominated him on it, but outside of that, you gotta ban it or else he's gonna tear you apart. So, yeah, a lot of things to deal with OMG. As for Invictus Gaming, I mean, they're out of playoffs. It doesn't really matter that they lost this, but it would have been a nice little morale booster. Unfortunately, they couldn't end up pulling it out here in games 2 and 3, but not a bad series overall. Like I said, On and Mole kind of destroyed that game 1. It was really, really dominant from them on the Ahri and the Samira, both of them absolutely clapping OMG, basically all across the board. But outside of that, they really collapsed. Mid-jungle was really solid in game 1, and it really felt like they had been developing a really good synergy, Jun and Mole, over the course of the split, but games 2 and 3, they got a little bit abused and exposed. Mole especially kind of got beat up here by Cream in lane. The Vex pick in game 3, I'm certainly not super on board with. I think that is a pick that you can play, but maybe not into Ahri. That's not exactly the matchup I would particularly say Vex maximizes herself in, but it is what it is, and then the Galio also got destroyed. But Jun got completely out-jungled. Like, the scoreline doesn't tell you nearly as much, but Jun had almost no control over the last 2 to 3 games, so he's going to get my dud of the series here. It was very disappointing to watch Jun, because this is someone who I think has done a good job of at least attempting to play from behind. Like, he does a good job of not being in the lead and still being relevant, but it was certainly not the case in this series here. Definitely a good performance from Aki, and he very much outplayed Jun over the course of this series. But On and Wink played well, Mole played well in that game 1 and then got destroyed, and then Zika just kind of was a non-factor all series long. So, outlook-wise for these 2 teams, Invictus Gaming is out of playoffs, so I'm not going to worry about them too much. But OMG locked it. They're in playoffs. They're 500, and I'm happy for them. Hopefully this team can make some noise. They're going to have to, see who they're going to be playing in playoffs, but it's going to be an interesting series any way you slice it, because a lot of these bottom teams are teams that, quite frankly, are underperforming. We're looking at teams like LNG, looking at teams like FPX, looking at teams like BLG, or anyone's Legend. Like, there are so many options here for teams that could end up making the playoffs that OMG could have to face. There are a lot of interesting matchups there that I think a lot of people would be excited to see. So, definitely things to keep in mind for OMG, but they're going to be happy to make it there, and then, whoever they play at that point is just a bonus, because they've made playoffs now. Moving on to day 4 here in week 10. Day 4 had a couple of really, really fun series and important series for us. The first one being Team WE taking on FunPlus. Phoenix and FPX picking up the 2-0 win. WE only 1 series away at this point. They go to 0-15. They are 1 series away from the miraculous 0-16 split that we are all dreaming of. But let's talk about FPX first. This keeps their playoff hopes alive. They're certainly in a position where they're not guaranteed for playoffs. Some things definitely have to go right for them, but winning in this series was definitely one of those things, and they completed that. Not that WE is the most fearsome of competitors, but FPX winning is good nonetheless. This was really a coming out party for Summit in the top lane, who I think has had some really unfortunate weeks the past few weeks. Like, it's not been very good. He's definitely not been a superstar this split so far. You can argue whether he's been an upgrade or a downgrade to FPX as a total. Obviously, him coming in and them starting to win, definitely there is a little bit of a correlation there, but it's not always been directly Summit that's been doing it. But he was really good in this series, in this 2-game series here. The Kennen game in game 1 was super duper important towards this team actively winning the series. His ults in those later team fights were the reason that they won those games. So without Summit, I'm not sure they win that. And then in game 2, he picks up the Gnar and goes into the Jax, which is honestly kind of an okay matchup for the Jax, at least later on in the game, because Gnar is going to be grouped up a lot. It's not like Gnar is a particularly great side laner into Jax if he needs to stop him, so honestly, I don't hate that matchup as long as Jax can get there. Unfortunately for Demon, he's just not good enough to get there, and so Summit gets super far ahead on the Gnar, is able to completely rock these team fights and take the series. Summit is going to get my player of the series here in the top lane for FPX. Probably his best split, or his best series of the split here against WE. Not that going up against Demon is that tough of a competition, but honestly, everybody on the team played well. I want to give a big shout out to Clid, who I think is honestly relatively underrated at this point. I think you can make a real case that Clid was the best player on FunPlus Phoenix this split, And I would make that case. Clid was probably the best player on FPX over the course of the summer, and especially the most important to their wins. And I just don't think he gets that kind of credit for this team. Obviously, I'm really high on LWX and Hang, but they've been kind of quiet, I think, for a majority of the summer split, which has been a little bit disappointing. And I think Clid has kind of, when they've won, stepped up and been the focal driving point. And when they lose, sometimes he can be the problem, but oftentimes, you know, it's just a team diff with FPX. So overall, Clid had a really good series, completely out-jungled View. Kara was good, LWX was good, Hang was good. FPX looked really, really solid here. As for WE, they moved to 0-15. They're one series away from going 0-16, and they are playing like it. Not only are their bad players still playing bad in Demon and View, Demon getting the dud of the series, by the way, very deserved. Picking Jackson to Gnar can work, but only if you can get past the early stage, which he absolutely could not. But View is also still getting out-jungled by pretty much everybody he goes into. I'm pretty convinced at this point that View is just not an LPL caliber player. He's been one of the worst junglers in the LPL all split long. And yes, I know, tough competition here with Clid, but Clid obliterated him in the series. It was not even close in either game. Shanks and Jing, though, like, they've been kind of the highlights, and even they were not very good in this series, at least positioning-wise. I think if you take them out of WE, they look a lot better, but unfortunately, I feel like the morale on this team is just dead, and they're honestly kind of playing for the 0-16 at this point. Maybe they're not doing that, but, like, it's definitely on their mind at this point. Something to think about. So, WE not playing well. FPX, though, absolutely crushing them and keeping their playoff hopes alive. Outlook-wise, WE's gone. I'm not even going to talk about them. FPX does need some things to go right. There are some teams that definitely need to lose. They're in that cluster that I kind of talked about in my last series here. You know, ThunderTalk needs to start losing. A team like BLG needs to start losing. A team like Anyone's Legend needs to make sure they don't win later this week. FPX needs a lot of other teams to actually lose in order for them to have a chance at making playoffs, but it is certainly on the table. It's not completely out of out of the question. And so hopefully for them, a lot of things can go right, because I do like this FPX team, and I think they've probably played well enough to deserve making it into playoffs. But that start to the year was really disastrous towards their hopes, and it's just about whether or not they can recover from that. Moving on to our second series here of day 4, and we have another interesting one with some playoff implications. Pretty much every game from this point on, not all of them, but pretty much all of them have playoff implications, and this one being ThunderTalk Gaming taking on Ultra Prime, and ThunderTalk picking up a very important 2-0 win for their playoff cause. This puts them in a super good position. They have one more series left of the year later against Rare Atom. All they have to do is win that series, and they are guaranteed in playoffs because of this win, and because of the 2-0 here, especially. That was huge for them, and honestly, they played great in this series. Let's talk about what they did. UCal, man, like, I was really down on him earlier in the week in their loss, but he really turned it around here against Ultra Prime and completely carried ThunderTalk to another win. He's someone who I think has definitely been on the up and up in this new meta where Talia is a super valuable pick, and we all know that UCal's Talia is probably one of, if not his best champions, so really, really great to see that from UCal. He looked awesome in this series just in general, completely destroying Cryan. Really wasn't even that close, and he is easily going to get my player of the series here for ThunderTalk. But everybody on the team kind of played well. Want to give a big shout out to Kepler and Yao Yao. I know I've done that quite a few times, but man, they have really just drastically changed the outlook of what this ThunderTalk Gaming team was. They were a bottom 5 team, and then Kepler and Yao Yao come in for Puff and Southwind, and all of a sudden this team has a real shot at making playoffs this split. They've got to be the biggest change that any team has made in the LPL in a positive manner so far this split. They have been awesome for ThunderTalk, and they've been directly correlated, like their awesome gameplay is directly correlated, I should say, to this team winning more. And then Beishuan was always underrated. You had Hoya here in the top lane, obviously formerly of Damwon, and he finally gets a chance to, like, actually show that maybe he's not the weak link of a great team, right? He was really good in this series, and I know it's against Zoom, who has been a complete train wreck so far in the LPL, but Hoya was really, really solid in this series, and he's been solid for ThunderTalk. Honestly, I'm just really into this team, and I'm really hoping they can pull it together and make playoffs, but a really, really great series. UCal with the carry, but everybody else really facilitating that and opening up a lot of lanes for this ThunderTalk Gaming team. As for Ultra Prime, I mean, it's disappointing because they were a team that I think genuinely should have been a playoff contender, at least on paper. Cryan and Elk are simply too good of players to not make playoffs, and Elk still played pretty well in this series. Cryan has been playing well for most of the year, but the rest of this team is simply just too heavy to carry. Even when Elk and Cryan are playing well, Zoom and Hacker have been such giant negatives for this team so far this year that it's basically been impossible for this Ultra Prime team to find any level of consistency throughout the year. And that continues here. Xiaoxi is out. Meow Meow has been in for the last few weeks. It's not like he's been an upgrade. In fact, he's pretty clearly been a downgrade. However, I get wanting to roll with him because you're out of playoffs. You might as well see what you have in your young support here. But he has been awful. Meow Meow is going to get my dud of the series here for Ultra Prime. He just continues to be a negative for this Ultra Prime team, not really contributing at all to any winning games from them, which is unfortunate because a player like Elk definitely deserves to be on a playoff team. Like, he is way, way too good to miss playoffs, and it's really disappointing to watch that. Hopefully he can leave this Ultra Prime team next year, or maybe they can just get a bunch more talent around him, because he should not be a player that is missing playoffs 2 years in a row. Like, that is just unacceptable for a player of Elk's caliber. He could be a top 5 AD carry in the LPL, like, very, very realistically. And so, definitely disappointing, but, you know, this Ultra Prime team has not looked good for quite a while, so it's not like this has been entirely surprising. We've known that they're a bottom team. Zoom is the worst top laner in the LPL. Hacker is the worst jungler in the LPL, or at least one of them. Like, they can't find a support who can play. Cryan had a bad series, which meant that there was just really no chance that Ultra Prime stood any sort of reasonable opportunity here, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. Outlook-wise for these two teams, Ultra Prime's bad. I'm not going to talk about them. ThunderTalk, like I said, controls their own destiny. If they win against Rare Atom later in the week, who is a bad team, might I add, they are in playoffs. They are locked in playoffs. And they would, I think, officially knock Bilibili Gaming out unless there was some really, really weird shenanigans. But ThunderTalk definitely deserves to be in here. Like, there's really no other way to put it. ThunderTalk is a team that I think, yes, they started off super duper weak in a similar way to FPX, but they have turned it on so much towards the back half here that I really hope this team can figure out a way to seal the deal and make playoffs, I think for the first time in their organization's history, which would genuinely be phenomenal to watch. Moving on to day 5 here, and kicking off day 5 was probably the least important of the remaining games of this week, or at least, you know, one of the less important ones. Two teams that are out of the playoffs here between Invictus Gaming and LGD Gaming. Invictus does pick up the 2-1 win, and you know what? Good on them. They look good in this game. This is a team that I think has probably been a little hard done this year in terms of, I don't know, they maybe just aren't as bad as they seem to be. I think if they maybe had this 5 all year long, maybe with the exception of Wink, that they would have been in a situation that was pretty good. Mole has been a huge improvement, I think, to this Invictus Gaming team, and he's really helped unlock June and really give June all of the tools that he needs to really be better for IG here. And so, big shout out to the jungle mid duo. I really think that they have some chemistry, and this might be a duo that I'm not going to say you want to stick with, but definitely something to look at for next year, because it definitely feels like these two have worked really well together. Player of the series, no doubt here, it's not even close, is going to go to June in the jungle here. He got the dud of the series earlier this week. He gets the player of the series in this week against LGD. He was really dominant. Not only was he still good in their game 1 that they lost, probably their best player pretty easily, but he dominated both games 2 and 3. Like, the Wukong game was an obliteration. It was never even remotely close. That game was over in 24 minutes. Game 3 wasn't much longer, only 4 minutes longer, and June did his, you know, best to be just as strong here on the Xin Zhao. A very, very good series overall from him. Completely out jungling Kui, which I know isn't like the biggest accomplishment in the world, as he's been pretty awful for this LGD team, but, you know, it's still a good showing from June, who has been pretty underrated and definitely IG's best player all year long. Rest of the team was all right. Like I said, I think Mole is actually super underrated by the community at large. I'm not going to quite go on lyrics, you know, I'm not stealing his thunder, or not trying to steal his thunder, but Mole was really good for Invictus Gaming this split, and I think him joining the roster really made them, like, sneakily a pretty decent team. Not a great team, but a decent team. Like, a team that can actively compete with some of these bottom-tier playoff teams, and pretty consistently is able to beat the other bottom-tier teams in the league, like LGD. And so, June and Mole I really do like. Even On, I thought, played relatively okay for the second half of the split. It was just Wink that was such a huge problem, especially towards the first half of this split, where it just felt like the games were unwinnable with this bottom lane. And so, you know, I'm not going to say that that's entirely indicative of, you know, how these two play, but Wink role swapping to support, in my opinion, most certainly was not a success. And then Zika, he was fine. I think a lot of people see a lot of hype in him. I haven't seen a lot of, like, unbelievable plays from him, but he's fine. Definitely not someone that I'm writing home about, but, you know, he's fine. He's whatever. Moving on to LGD. They suck. Fearness looked good in this series, and he looked good earlier in the week in their win, too. So that's something to keep in mind, is that Fearness definitely continues to do his best to keep a spot on an LPL team. He did this last year as well, where he was kind of meh for most of the year on a bad team, and then he picked it up and realized, like, hey, you know, maybe if I start playing well towards the back half of the split, I'll have a job next year. And that's kind of what happened here for Fearness. I'm not going to say that's entirely confirmed, because I don't know if I would want to go into the future with someone like Fearness in the top lane, but he did play the week 10 really, really well. Someone who had a pretty good week overall. It's just the rest of the team that completely let him down. Haichao was fine. He didn't take a lot of risks. Like, his score looks good, but he really didn't make a lot of plays. Like, he was just kind of there. Really, the weakness for this team was jungle and then support. Jungle Kui got completely destroyed by Jun in the jungle. It really wasn't even remotely close. And then Jin Zhao was just not good, and he has not been good at all so far this year. He's probably been better than my expectation was. I had him as, like, bottom 1 in terms of supports. He's certainly not been bottom 1. I think Wink has definitely been worse than him, but he hasn't been good either, and he certainly hasn't been someone that I would want or feel comfortable going into the future at support with. So definitely something to keep in mind. Jin Zhao was not good here. He's my dud of the series here against Invictus Gaming, and I think that's pretty indicative of how he's played for most of the year. But outlook-wise, I don't really need to go into the outlooks, I think, for either of these two teams. Neither of them are going to make playoffs, even if Invictus did start to get hot towards the back half of the split. You know, you really hope that, you know, players like Jun and Mole, and even someone like Shadow, who's just not been getting playtime for LGD for no reason, you really hope they find good spots next year, because I think they are solid players that definitely deserve to be at least in contention for playoffs, and they certainly weren't this year. So a couple of players that I definitely want to see get into better environments, but it isn't going to happen for either of these teams this year. Moving on to our second series here of Day 5 action, and our second series here was certainly an interesting one between Weibo Gaming and LNG Esports. LNG picking up a 2-0 win, and both games ludicrously clean. Even game 1, where it was like, you know, definitely still in Weibo's grasp, it very much felt like an LNG win, and they just had to get there, right? Like, they were always in the driver's seat. They just had to close it out, and they did, and then game 2 was a complete stomp. Really, really good series here from LNG. This is what we've been waiting for. Like, this is the LNG that I think everybody wanted to see all year long. A team that felt really, really clean in their early game and in their execution, that was able to translate leads and was able to punish mistakes over and over again. That's exactly what we got in this series. This may be the best that LNG has looked in quite a long time, and it is probably at the perfect time for this team. Obviously, their win here gives them 8 wins. It sets them at 8-8, which means they have officially locked playoffs, and I believe they have officially locked the 7 seed, which means that they will be facing whoever comes in 10th. But yeah, huge, huge win for LNG here. This also locks Weibo at 6 instead of 5. EDG can no longer be passed by Weibo, which means that, let's say LNG wins their first round matchup, we could be getting a rematch of these two teams in the second round of the playoffs. Would certainly be an interesting dynamic there, but LNG looked great in this series. Pretty much everybody on the team deserves a shout out. I do want to give a special shout out here to Tarzan, though, who really just controlled the map in a way that we have not seen him do at all this year. I don't want to say that Tarzan's been bad, but he certainly hasn't been good for a majority of this split. He's kind of just been there for LNG, which has been incredibly disappointing for this team as a whole, but he finally showed up. He gets his first player of the split for me in this week, or in this game, which is absurd that this is his first one in the final week of the season. But that's what it is here, and he gets it. He's my player of the series. Tarzan was really, really good. 2 games at Trundle that completely destroyed SOFM and destroyed the map at large. Really, really good series from him. And then great from Ale and Doenby. The solo laners really stepped up. Ale back in here. We have some more clarity on the situation between Ale and LNG now that he was actively sitting out because of contract disputes that he had with LNG. He was supposed to be paid an extra amount of money for streaming a certain amount of hours in spring, and he never got that money, so he wasn't going to play until he got the money. But now he has the money, and so he's playing. You know, poor Pandacy just kind of got thrown into the action because of that, but Ale is back in, and this team looks reinvigorated and fired up. Ale was great in this series, completely destroyed the Shy, which we'll get to. And then Doenby was phenomenal here. Great on the Akali in Game 1, arguably even better in Game 2 here on the Taliyah. 2 really solid games from Doenby, and one of his more consistent series in quite a while. He's been good at points in this season, I should say, but it certainly has not been recently, and it's good to see him kind of get a little bit back into form against a good team right before playoffs. Light and Lumao continue to dominate, continue to be good. I really like this duo. I do think it's better than Light and Awandi. I don't know how much hate I'm going to get for that, but I do think Lumao is better at this point than Awandi is, and I think it's been proven over and over again that this duo definitely makes Light look better, and I'm happy to say that. Moving on to Weibo, though, definitely a disappointing loss here. This is a team that I think a lot of people were hyping up as potentially even a slayer of some of the top 4 teams, but they couldn't even compete all today with LNG. It wasn't even like it was close in either of these games, quite frankly. And a lot of that was due to the shy. Like, this is what happens. This is what happens with Weibo Gaming, right? Sometimes you get the shy, sometimes you get the shite. And that's kind of what we got today, is he played super aggressive on the Sedge, he played super aggressive on the Gnar, and he got hyper punished for both of those games. He was awful in this series. He's easily the dud of the series. It's not even remotely close. He was really bad. And it's not a great sign, but, you know, this is the shy. This is what you get with him. When he is on your team, sometimes he's going to carry you to a win, and sometimes he's going to carry the other team to a win. And unfortunately, that's just what happened for Weibo here today. Not like everybody else played well. Like I said, SOFM, hard out jungled by Tarzan in terms of map pressure in both games. And On couldn't stop dying either. It's not like that was a particularly good one for him. He played a good game on Pyke, but he was abysmally bad on the Rakan in game 2. So definitely, it's not like Weibo was only the shy losing. It was pretty much everybody on the team just not showing up, which is definitely a little concerning. We know that this team can be volatile, but you're just hoping that it's not this volatile to make LNG look like one of the best teams in the LPL. But that's kind of what we got here. Outlook-wise for these two teams, Weibo's now locked 6th, LNG is now locked 7th. And so LNG will play number 10, Weibo will play the winner of 7 and 10. So these two teams very well could be playing each other in a best of 5 in just a couple of days. It's certainly an interesting proposition, but this is definitely something to keep in mind. If these two teams play, LNG completely obliterated them in this series. So definitely something to keep in mind, but it's going to be interesting moving forward with the playoff bracket and how that works out. Moving on to day 6 now here in the final week of LPL action, and we had a series to talk about here. Of course, I'm just going to get into it. We're talking about ThunderTalk Gaming taking on Rare Atom. If ThunderTalk Gaming wins this series, they lock playoffs, but they can't do it against the 3-12 Rare Atom team. They win game 1, and they're not able to pull out games 2 and 3. They give Leon his Nidalee in game 3 against the Poppy, and he takes over. Strive has a phenomenal series on the Zoe, and ThunderTalk just can't do it. It's heartbreaking. It's completely heartbreaking for ThunderTalk fans. And, oh man, it's just so sad. This was such a winnable series, not even just because you're playing Rare Atom, who is a bad team, but because you were in a spot, not only were you up 1-0, which is already a huge advantage in a best of 3, but not only do you have the better players, which we know you have the better players, not only was iBoy trying his best to completely run it down this series, but you just had to ban the Renekton Nidalee, and you didn't ban the Renekton Nidalee, and it takes over in game 3, the staple of Rare Atom, what they dominated on in spring, and they do it. They pull off the huge win. Let's talk about it. Leon's player of the series. You can't give him 2 games in Nidalee. You just can't. Even the game 1 where they lost, he was still pretty good. But man, that game 3 was disgusting. That was top lane over and over and over again. Beishwan got abused over and over and over again in that game as well. Oh, it was just disgusting to watch Cube and Leon play this combo so perfectly that it is really difficult to play into. Even if neither of these champions are particularly meta right now, they're both so good at them that you have to be aware of it and you have to prepare to play into it. They were happily giving it up, and then unfortunately, here we are. We're sitting here with the Rare Atom win. Strive, I gotta give credit to, though. He's been kind of a little bit underrated all year long. I think he's been okay for Rare Atom. He's never actively been the problem for this team. He's just never really been, like, dominant for this team. He was great in this series. Not only was he awesome in Game 2 on the Sylas, he was even better in Game 3 on the Zoe here, doing so much damage and helping Rare Atom really secure the end of that game. Even if iBoy and Yuyanja weren't actively good, and by the way, Yuyanja's back in for this series, not Zora, who was their best player for a considerable amount of when he was playing. even if they weren't playing well, which they weren't playing particularly great, the top side was winning so hard that it wasn't even remotely close. So, moving on to ThunderTalk, what a disastrous way to end your season. I'm not going to blame them too much because obviously they're probably feeling it right now, obviously, but at the end of the day, you got to win the series. Moving back, though, you get 1 or 2 more series with Kepler and Yao Yao as opposed to Puff or Southwind. If management wasn't stubborn enough to play Puff and Southwind at the beginning of the split, this team is almost certainly in playoffs, and they actually may have pushed for top 5. Like, they really were that good this split. Maybe not, like, as good as EDG and Weibo, but, like, they could have had 9 wins on the season pretty easily because they're going to end with 7. You're saying they couldn't have gotten 2 more if they would have played Kepler and Yao Yao from the start of the season. It's incredibly disappointing. It's got to feel bad, but at the end of the day, this is the hole you dug yourself with the beginning of this split. So Hoya's going to get my dud of the series because he just got outplayed by Cube. Quite frankly, it wasn't all that close. Cube pulling out the Shanji Rumble, and then the Renekton here in Game 3 and just completely destroyed him. Hoya was not up for the challenge here today, and unfortunately, he was a big reason why they lost. Beishwan was pretty close second place, though. He did not have a good series at all. Got completely out-jungled by Leon in both Games 2 and 3, especially in that Game 3, but Game 2 as well on the Pantheon. Leon was still really good, so overall, just rough from the top side here of Hoya and Beishwan. If they had stepped up today, this team is probably going to playoffs. Yucal had been carrying this team so, like, on his back over the past couple of weeks. He still has a pretty decent series. Even when they lost here, he was great in Game 1 here on the Sylas, but just wasn't able to bring it back here for the rest of the series. Super disappointing, and it's got to feel so bad for ThunderTalk, but outlook-wise, they are now locked out of the playoffs. They cannot make it at 7 wins because the tiebreaker, I think they lose to BLG and Anyone's Legend. So even if things were to go wrong, like, they're on the bottom and they're on the out. So really unfortunate to say, but ThunderTalk is now officially out of the playoffs, and that is disappointing. Rare Atom, it doesn't matter. They're not in playoffs. They're not playing for playoffs. They just played spoiler here today for ThunderTalk season, and it's got to feel bad for TT and for TT fans, but hopefully they have some building blocks to build off of next year. Yucal is good. Kepler's good. Yao Yao's good. Beishwan's good. If they can get a really good top laner, there's a chance that this team could actively be a little bit scary next year, and that is something I'm very, very excited to see. Moving on to our second series here of Day 6 action, and like I said, Day 6 is kind of where we figured everything out, and this series was the tipping point. Of course, I'm talking about Anyone's Legend taking on Top Esports. A lot of stuff happened. Top picks up the 2-0 expected win here, although Qingtian is in the top lane instead of Wayward. Maybe a little bit of, signaling like, hey, Wayward, you played really shit earlier this week. You can't play like that. If you play like that, I don't know if we can play you. He'll be playing in the playoffs. I'm positive, but something to keep in mind there that they did take him out here. TES stomps Anyone's Legend. They look phenomenal in this series, or at least their main pieces do, and this actually locks up playoffs, which we'll get to at the end here, but TES looking real good, especially Knight and Jackie Love. Jackie Love had a very rough series earlier in the week where he got pretty much outclassed by Fodic, which was not great to see, but man, going up against a little bit of a weaker bot lane here in Betty and Chocho, he looked dominant. Jackie Love looked great. And then Knight. I mean, it's Knight. He got Sylas and Akali, and he dominated both games. Knight is easily the player of the series here. He continues to be... I don't want to spoil who my MVP pick is, but I don't know. It's really going to shock a lot of people that I think Knight is my favorite. Knight was so good this season for the best team in the league. He just was phenomenal, and he was great in this series as well. Not only did he dominate, 14, 1, and 12, dominate in Game 1 here on the Sylas, but in Game 2, he was still really good on the Akali. Another almost double-digit kill game for him there. So overall, just a phenomenal series from Knight. 23 kills and 19 assists across 2 games with only 2 deaths on Assassins is the way to go. So big shout out there, although he was playing into a mid laner who was for some reason making his stage debut today, which we will get into. But yeah, Knight and Jackie Love really carried. Mark had a really, really good series. Like I say, when Jackie Love and Mark win, they really win. It's not that close. Tian was fine, but you have Qingtian in the top lane who went and replaced Wayward. He didn't look very good in this series. I don't feel very confident that he's going to be playing in playoffs, but sure, you wanted to give him a game at the end of the split here? Whatever. That's fine. He looked not great, but it was fine. It wasn't the worst thing in the world. As for Anyone's Legend, like I said, they roll with their typical lineup, except, oops, now we've got Harder in the mid lane instead of Forge. We've played Forge all year long, but for the most important game of our entire split, we're going to go with someone who has not played a single game in the LPL. and he gets obliterated. He gets obliterated by Knight. It wasn't even remotely close. I don't know what the expectation was here, but I do not understand. This is win trading. Like, I don't get it. What is happening? Why would you do this? Anyways, Harder's my dud of the series. He got completely bodied by Knight in lane, out of lane, in roams, macro, wherever. Like, he just got bodied in this series. He was never on the same wavelength as the rest of his team, and it showed over and over again with him getting caught or him getting outplayed. I don't know why he was in this game. I don't know what was happening. Forge was not bad this year, so I don't get it. Like, I simply do not understand what caused anyone's legend to say, screw it, we're just going to go with this new kid that's never played before in our final series against the best team in the league. So, very, very weird. Betty and Chocho also played bad. Definitely not a good series from them. They got completely outplayed by Jackie Love and Mark in both games. Obviously, Xiaohao actually kind of played okay. Like, I want to give him a little bit of a shout out. He definitely tried in game one. He was everywhere on the Wukong, and he was dying quite a bit, but he was also making plays. I want to give him credit. He's had a kind of a bad, you know, he's kind of had a bad draw of things, is what I'll say for Xiaohao. He was good, really, really good over the first half of the split. And then, obviously, they get this really tough schedule towards the back half. And even then, I still think he's easily been this team's best player. And I think a lot of people are going to discredit how well Xiaohao played this year because the team really started to struggle towards the end. But I thought he was really, really good for anyone's legend. Definitely the standout player from a team that very, very much should have made playoffs. But yeah, ZDZ was fine. He played into Qingtian and was fine. Overall, outlook-wise, we now know the 10 teams in playoffs. Anyone's legend has now officially been locked out of playoffs with this loss, which means that somehow, some way, Bilibili Gaming makes playoffs as the 10 seed, which is about as miraculous as they could have hoped for. They needed many things to go right here. ThunderTalk lost to Rare Atom. Anyone's legend got 2-0'd by Top Esports. They didn't win a single game this week, and that means that Bilibili Gaming is now sitting in the 10 seed in playoffs. Remember, if AL had taken a single game this week, one game, if they have not gone 0-4, if they had won a single game, they would have made playoffs as the 10 seed because they would have had equal records with BLG, and they hold the tiebreaker because they beat them. But oh well, oops. So yeah, AL is now locked out of playoffs. Top with this win has officially locked the number 1 seed in the LPL. 2 through 4 are still up for debate in the final day here, with RNG taking on LGD. But Top Esports has officially locked in the number 1 spot in playoffs, and they absolutely deserve it. They look dominant all throughout the regular season, and all you can hope for from this team is that they can continue that in the playoffs. Moving on now to day 7. It is the 7th and final day, not only of week 10 here in the LPL, but of course of the LPL regular season. And jumping into the final day of the LPL regular season, we kicked it off with the storyline of the split for many people. Of course, I am talking about Ultra Prime taking on Team WE, and they did it, folks. They did it. We're so proud of them. WE has gone 0-16, only the second team in the history of the LPL to ever do so, obviously behind Victory 5 doing it in their first split. But we've got to be so proud. A legendary org like WE finally adding another accomplishment to their banners. Yeah, this is not good for them, but obviously it's fun for us as fans. We can talk about the series a little bit, although it didn't matter all that much. Ultra Prime was the better team here by a considerable margin. WE actually had quite a considerable lead in game 1 that they just completely threw away. They're like, oh wait, I forgot, we have to lose so we can go 0-16. And then game 2 was not close. Ultra Prime had it all the way. Player of the series is pretty easy for me. It's going to go to Cryan here in the mid lane, although I will say there was a very, very, very strong case for me to make that Harry up in the top lane here was the player of the series, because holy crap, like, if this guy's been here and Zoom has been playing over him this whole split, what has been going on? I know he played into Demon, who is maybe the worst top laner outside of Panda C, maybe even including Panda C that this league has, but holy crap, he was great in this series. He looked awesome, especially on that Gwen in game 1. He still looked really good on the Gangplank in game 2. If he's going to play like this, let him play all year. I mean, he's better than Zoom easily if he's going to play like this. He very nearly got my player of the series for this week because he was really, really, really good, but just couldn't quite pull it away. Still a very good series from both the solo laners here, and definitely like, where was this? If this is what Zoom's been playing over all season, definitely disappointing. But Elk continues to be good. Meow Meow had a fine series here, 2 games of Lucian Nami. And Hacker actually won a jungle matchup. Yes, it's against the only jungler in the league that I think, maybe other than Kui, that is worse than him in view. But, you know, he won it, so good for him. Overall, Ultra Prime looked good. WE, they did it. Like, they looked bad, and they clearly tried to look bad, because they actually were in a decent spot at the beginning of Game 1. They had some gold on Shanks, on Trundle, on Jing here on the Aphelios. Like, they had gold, and they just turned it into nothing. The mispositionings cost them. Jing and Kadai actually played this series relatively okay. Maybe not the Game 2. Jing had a kind of a bad Game 2 here on the Varus. I think the first Varus we've seen all year. But still not great. Shanks continues to look checked out, and then Demon and View are bad players. Like, there's really no other way to put it. I know View has supposedly had some upside, and he was really good in the LDL, but he never at any point looked good in the LPL, so definitely still worried about that, and View is going to get my dud of the series here. He got completely out-jungled by Hacker of all people, never had any pressure on the map, was a complete ward for the entirety of the series, and Beishang's probably looking at his monitor being like, this guy's playing over me? So, not great here from WE, but of course, it doesn't matter. They pulled it. They pulled the 0-16, and so they lost on purpose, and we're happy for them. Outlooks of these two teams, no one's going to remember Ultra Prime. Everyone's going to remember the 0-16 WE team, and so they will live in the annals of history forever, and I hope we never forget them. May they live in immortality. Moving on to our second game here, our second series of Day 7, and the final series of the year in the LPL. Of course it had to be an upset. Of course it had to have playoff ramifications. Of course I'm talking about LGD Gaming actively taking down Royal Never Give Up RNG 2-1. Of course, some random team on the last day of the year is going to beat RNG. It is fate at this point, especially because it's LGD. But yeah, they won. And you know what? They did it using the lineup that I said they should have been using all year long. And so I'm not going to say I feel vindicated here, but man, Shadow and Yeji, good players and better players than what they had been playing. They're not the only reasons they won. Hell, they're not even the main reasons they won. But them being in was a positive. I'm just going to take this small win where I can get it because RNG just lost to LGD and now they have to be on the wrong side of the bracket. So oops on them, but let's talk about it. LGD looked good here. Not only did they look good, but like some of the players that you were really like worried about looked good. Fearness had such an amazing week 10 for LGD. Like he's actually in my player of the week conversations. He was that good. And it was really, really shocking. Shout out the Fiora. You can't give Fearness Fiora. You gotta know you can't give Fearness Fiora. Every other team this year has learned that you can't give Fearness Fiora. But they gave it to him, and he dominated. He looked so good in that Game 3. He even looked great in that Game 1. Like, he was very close to making that Game 1 an interesting one here with the 6-kill Fiora, but fortunately, the rest of his team was just too far behind. Then you had Fearness in Game 3 dominate, looking really, 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 really good. You're wondering why I haven't mentioned Game 2. Not that he was bad in Game 2, but we had the bot lane of the century in Game 2 of Awesome and Jinja. I'll pull out the Nyla Pike. Nyla's first win in pro play, might I add. She's been giga garbage every time we've seen her, especially into Zeri or Sivir or anybody who can really team fight around her. But that Pike from Jinjiao was just a tad bit built different. What a game. One of Jinjiao's best games of the split. He's actually had a few of these, like, really high-profile games. They just haven't been very consistent, but he dominated 10-kill Pike game from Jinjiao here in Game 2 against RNG, the MSI champions. Really, really fun to watch. Honestly, LGD in this series was really fun to watch. None of it matters, because it's not like they were in playoffs, but they did play spoiler to RNG's playoff, like, side selection hopes. And that's really, really going to play in maybe a factor towards how RNG gets to Worlds and if they get to Worlds easily this year. And that's awesome. Like, shout out to LGD for this win. They looked great. Fearness and Jinjiao and Awesome looked great. Even if Shadow and Yeji were kind of bad in Game 1, they pulled it around and were really good in Games 2 and 3. This is what I want to see. Like, I want to see bottom teams playing their hearts out. Rare Adam did it. They played spoiler this week against ThunderTalk, and LGD has now done it against RNG. Beautiful thing to see. As for RNG, this is pretty disastrous as a loss. Obviously, you're still top 4, so it's not like you lose too much here, but not only do you drop from the number 2 seed to the number 4 seed because of this, but now you're on the same side as both Top Esports and Edward Gaming, which is probably the worst side you could possibly be on. I would much rather be on the side where I'm like, oh, hey there, JDG and Weibo Gaming, two teams that have historically been bad in playoffs. But alas, here we are, RNG sitting at number 4 and losing this. Wei's gonna get my dud of the series, although nobody on this team played particularly great, except for maybe Xiaohu. Xiaohu I thought had a pretty good series. Nobody else was like stellar, and nobody else was like really that bad, quite frankly. They just couldn't win the games. Like, they couldn't pull it out in the end. Even if they were relatively competitive, LGD had their number and was able to end these games quicker than RNG was able to come back in them, and that's huge for them. I don't want to talk about this series too much because I really don't think there's a lot of takeaways from this. Not that, like, Wei was super bad. He was just super aggressive, especially on that Xin Zhao in Game 3. He was really good in Game 1 on the Viego and then kind of got out-jungled by Shadow in the next 2 games. So definitely something to keep in mind there. But Wei's kind of been up and down all year long. Xiaohu has kind of been the heart and soul of this team. Him, Gala, Ming, they've been the focal points, and they were fine, but certainly not, you know, you could argue they weren't as good as Fearness, Awesome, and Jin Zhao in this series. So definitely something to keep in mind there. I don't think it matters too much. I'm not going to sit here and be like, RNG is way worse than I thought they were because they lost to LGD. I think this is just a blip on the radar, but at the end of the day, it's certainly a bad blip, and it's going to cost them in terms of playoff positioning in the long run. All right, that is going to do it for my LPL weekly recap here of Week 10, my overview and analysis of all 7 days, and that kind of concludes my weekly recap series here in summer of 2022 for the LPL. Hope you guys have enjoyed the ride. These have been a lot of fun to make. Obviously, it's not over. We've still got a bunch of playoff coverage coming you guys' way, and you can see that playoff outlook up on the screen right now where you see the updated standings. Normally, I would talk about the power rankings and their changes, but I'm not going to be doing power rankings this week because in just another day here, you guys are going to be seeing an LPL playoff primer video where not only I go over all of the playoff teams, but I give my full bracket prediction for how these playoffs go. I don't want my power rankings spoiling anything, but it could definitely be an interesting playoff run here for all of these teams. So I'm excited to go over that with you guys. I'm excited to go over all of this fun stuff because the teams that made the playoffs are shocking. The teams that didn't make the playoffs are shocking. There's a lot of good to talk about, a lot of bad to talk about, a lot of in-depth to go to with these teams, but I'm very, very excited to do it. I still have to talk about my player of the week and my dud of the week here, though. Obviously, that hasn't stopped here just because the season is over. My player of the week here in Week 10 of the LPL is actually going to go to Fearness on LGD Gaming, who really was awesome this week. He was so fun to watch. I mean, talk about a guy who's just played his way maybe into another year in the LPL. He was mediocre at best all year long. He shows up here in Week 10, and he gets my player of the week pretty deservedly, might I add. He was very, very solid this week for a team that I think surprised a lot of people with a couple of shocking wins. But my dud of the week, not quite as funny, is going to go to Demon here on WE. Honestly, he's everybody's player of the week in that respect because he helped secure the 0-16 for WE, so you can't even be mad. But yeah, he was really bad. He was really bad ever since he got subbed in. A lot of people talked about how Pandasy was bad, but that's because he was on a good team. Demon was way worse, and just because he was on a bad team doesn't mean I think he gets less coverage. But yeah, WE, Demon's going to get my dud of the week, and Fearness is going to get my player of the week. But that's going to do it. I really hope you guys enjoyed this series. It's been a lot of fun to make, and I'm hoping to be back next year for it. If you guys did enjoy this series, it really would mean a lot if you left a like down below. It really does mean a lot to the channel and a lot to me. This series was a lot of fun to do, and obviously the season's not over, but this is the last of these for the LPL that I will be making this year, so there's definitely that. Obviously, let me know down in the comment section below how you feel about all of these upsets that happened. TT not making playoffs, anyone's legend not making playoffs, BLG actually making playoffs. So many crazy things happened this week, and I want to hear what you guys think about it down in the comment section below. You know I love chatting it up with you all. So with that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.